Well, you may not believe it, but my tomato garden and a reputed New Orleans mob boss have something in common. Oh yeah, and LSU ties in as well. So if you're interested to find out, stay tuned to this episode of Growing Some Louisiana History. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Growing Some Louisiana History with me, David Hubbell, and this will be the fourth installment on my tomato garden in which I've been featuring the Louisiana seed varieties that I've been growing here. First off, let me thank everybody who has already subscribed to the David J. Hubbell YouTube channel. I appreciate all the likes and shares that you've given the series thus far, as well as the channel. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe and click that bell to be alerted to all upcoming videos on growing vegetables, Louisiana vegetables, and my Louisiana cooking. So in this episode, I want to share with you a little bit more information on the remaining two tomato varieties that I'm growing in my Louisiana tomato garden. And as you might have guessed, yes, they were developed by LSU. The first one is called the Louisiana All Season, and it came out around 1949 and 1950. It was in development around that time, and you start seeing it listed in the newspaper about 1950-ish, and it was pretty strongly recommended. It's an indeterminate. It's an 89-day tomato from maturity, planting to maturity. It's pinkish, and it's anywhere from globe-shaped to oblate is how they described it, or oblate. And it's listed as anywhere from 4 ounces to 16 ounces, so that's a quite wide range for some size for a tomato. It is listed as being a cross between the Louisiana Pink, which we featured early on, and the Break-A-Day, which we talked about in the first episode. So this one reached way back to the early days of the tomato development and probably the early days of LSU's tomato studies back to probably the 1920s, 1930s. What's beneficial about this one, it was really recommended for home gardens because it is Fusarium wilt resistant as well as heat tolerant. And being an 89-day tomato, what I've seen is that the more days to maturity for these tomatoes are ones that really tend to get bigger. Now I got my Louisiana All Season seeds from the Victory Seed Company that you can find it online. That's really one of the only sources I've seen it. I've grown it in the past, and I like it. I don't always remember having as much success because I may not have planted it. It's one of the later ones I found. I found like Louisiana Pinks and Creoles way back, but this one tends to be one I think I found within the last 4 or 5 years. So I haven't had quite as much experience with it, but you'll see it seems to be doing pretty well out on the vine right now. So we'll check that out and we'll find out more when we come back. So here is the Louisiana All Season that we talked about. As we described, you can see it's somewhat globe shaped, but also it's got the oblate shape. Just for my comparison's sake, you can see my hand. These are going to be decent size. I've got a cluster of 4 right there, and you can see there's some more right down there. The leaves, once again, are maybe a little larger. Let's see if I can get some in the sunlight. Then some. Once again, as you would expect, yellow tomato flowers. And these will be pinkish, as we described. So hopefully we'll see something on these in a little bit. They seem to be holding up very well. Pardon all my weeds. So the second tomato I'm growing is a relative newcomer. Came out, really was released about 1972, but seemed to be in the works from like the late 50s through the early 70s. Under the direction of Dr. Team, I believe that's how it's pronounced, Dr. Team Hernandez at LSU's horticultural department. It's called Pelican. If the name sounds familiar, it may be because you may have heard it associated with New Orleans mafia boss Carlos Marcellus. Pelican Tomato Company is the name of his company, or the company he founded in 1956. And I believe it still might be in existence today. But I think that because it was probably in the news a lot at that time, that might have inspired Dr. Hernandez and his team to come up with that name for this particular tomato. Now this tomato is described as being 8.2 ounces in size, but what you'll see I got out there does not resemble that at all. In fact, I believe what I've got is what is really maybe a Pelican cherry tomato. Now, I found these on Seed Savers, and at the time it just listed as Pelican, but now if you go to the Seed Savers, it shows it as Pelican or Pelican cherry, or cherry pelican, something like that. But anyway, I've been growing these for a while, and I really like them. They're very prolific. Even though they seem to be indeterminate, is what it's described, I think the plants seem to be more determinate, and they don't seem to last as long in the season. They get very dark. The leaves and foliage are much darker than most of the other tomatoes I've been growing, but they're very prolific, and it creates more of a what I call salad tomato. It's a little bit bigger than most of your cherry tomatoes, but I like the size, and what I like about it compared to some of the other cherry tomatoes that I've grown, like the Sweet 100s, is that I find this one gets ripe all the way through, whereas those smaller ones tend to stay green even when they look red on the outside. So we're going to go check this one out as well, and you'll see it was designed, at least the Pelican is designed for heat resistance, fusarium, wilt resistance, and cracking. So here are the Louisiana Pelican, or here are the Pelican tomatoes, cherry tomatoes. The term cherry was used a lot because of the fact they kind of form these little tiny clusters, and they are very prolific. These are still very small. You can see some more in the background there. Like I said, I really do like these a lot. They're great in tomatoes, great in salads. Here you can see the flowers. Now what I found with these is that they will tend to put on, and like gangbusters, they'll ripen pretty much all about the same time, and then the plant basically dies off before the other varieties. So hopefully I will learn a little bit more about whether or not LSU developed or did experiments that created the cherry variety that I'm growing here. I did notice that Seed Savers list both a cherry and just a regular Pelican. So I'm going to have to look and see if there is maybe a distinction. Maybe I can write to the person offering the seeds to find out exactly whether or not there's a difference. So the Pelican tomato was listed as being 8.2 ounces, which was listed about being on average 2 ounces larger than the Creole variety that was developed by LSU as well. So it is listed as being a red globe-shaped tomato. And as I mentioned earlier, mine seems to be the cherry variety, which retains that globe shape, and it does get pretty red. So I'm not sure if there was some work being done in the 70s. I did find some references where they talk about other experiments being done with the Pelican tomato. I think irradiating them up at the University of Tennessee and forcing some of the plants. One of them became a dwarf plant. Now I believe that just means the size that it would grow, not necessarily affect the tomato variety itself. But it looks like the popular or the modern cherry tomato that we know today seems to have come out through development in Israel around 1970s. So it wouldn't surprise me if maybe the Pelican variety, since it was being experimented on at that time, maybe it also was experimented on as creating a cherry or smaller variety for the home garden. I will continue to look and see if I can find any information on it, because I'm curious about it. But if anybody happens to know, please let me know. Now, if this Pelican tomato is not the same one developed by LSU, well, I guess at least I know I've got a good tomato that I like. But I hope to find more information on this, and I will let you know what I find. A little more information on Dr. Tim P. Hernandez. From what I could find, he was born in 1919 and passed away only recently in 2014. He was from Dusson, Louisiana, and he was in the armed forces during World War II and shortly thereafter. It looks like he joined the LSU facility, one of the growing facilities, around 1949, and then he was at the horticultural school from 1957 until his retirement in 1983. Like many of the other LSU professors we've talked about, or developers or directors of these tomato programs, he was also involved with sweet potatoes. Once again, as we talked about before, that's one of Louisiana's big cash crops. Now, I also found interesting, and I did not know at the time when I did the first episode, is that his team was also directly responsible for the creation of the Creole tomato variety that we hear today. So if you want to know the difference between that as well as the history of the Creole tomato, tune back into that first episode and you'll find out to see what the differences are. But like I said earlier, with the discussion of the Pelican name and the Creole name, it seems like the department was maybe focusing in on very popular names that were already out there. The Pelican name would have been very prevalent, especially from 1956 into the early 70s, with Mr. Marcellus's notoriety and probably frequent mentions in the newspaper. So I'm sure a variety named after his company or named similar to his company would have garnered a lot of interest. And the same thing with Creole. Creole was a very famous term already being used throughout Louisiana, and so I'm sure that they banked on that familiarity with the public to spread word about these new seeds that they were growing. So we appreciate all the work that Dr. Hernandez has done in the past, and hopefully his legacy continues to live on through these seeds. And if I find out any more, I'm obviously going to do a part 2, because once again, all these tomatoes have not started ripening yet. So hopefully in part 2, when these tomatoes are ripening, I'll have a better idea if I've learned any more information on him or some of his other works. So that's it for this week's episode of Growing Some Louisiana History. Oh, please do me a favor, if you have not already subscribed, please click that subscribe button, as well as the bell to be alerted to upcoming episodes. Hopefully in the second part of all these episodes on the tomatoes, you'll actually see me picking the ripe ones and tasting them. Unfortunately, I've already noticed that some of my earlier plants have succumbed to some sort of fusarium wilt. So I'm not sure. Hopefully the plants will survive. If not, I may just have to report on that as well. I'll take some videos of what those look like so you can have an idea of what to look for in that case. So thank you again, and probably the next episodes are going to start migrating to some of the other plants. I've got eggplants, maybe some sugar cane, as well as melitone, my personal favorite. And I will also get back to that Perique tobacco we talked about before. So if you have any questions or have any suggestions or have any comments that can add to the history of these tomato varieties, please leave them in the comment section below, or send them to me at rpcajun2r@gmail.com, as well as share this episode with all your tomato loving friends. I appreciate it, and I will see you next week.